Déjà vu is that strangest little nudge that tells you you have lived a single second before. But what happens when that nudge does not go away and starts dictating what will happen next, down to the smallest sound and the smallest breath? I do not talk about this kind of thing often, but something happened to me that made me question whether memory is only a memory, or a map of moments that have not yet arrived. It began in a way that felt ordinary and then stacked itself into a pattern so exact it stopped feeling like coincidence. I will tell you 4 chilling true stories of déjà vu that will leave you speechless, each one reported to me by people who swore they were not inventing details, each one starting with a familiar feeling and ending somewhere between fear and a kind of terrible clarity. I smelled rubber and lemon cleaner in the first hallway. I heard a twig snap under wet leaves on a trail. I felt the steering wheel vibrate in a way that matched a dream, and I stood in a room of quiet carpet and heard a resident say the same sentence 3 nights in a row. These accounts are presented as they were told to me, alleged and specific, with names and small documents where available. If you have ever had that pull in your chest, write yes in the comments and the age you were so we can see if patterns repeat. Listen close and stay with me until the end because the last story will change how you think about memory itself. I grew up on the edge of a town where weather and memory braided together. As a child, I learned routes by heart, how the light hit the bakery window at 5, how the old sycamore smelled after rain. My family was ordinary, my childhood full of routines that later made small echoes that felt familiar and safe. A teenager, I watched an accident from a porch and kept replaying the tiny sequence of sounds, the pop of windshield, the glass like rain. That image taught me to notice patterns in the world and to write them down. As an adult, I became someone friends came to when they could not explain a recurring dream or a frightening sense of pre-knowing. I kept a small notebook and a habit of knocking on wood when I felt the air tilt. Now, years later, these encounters with déjà vu have me wondering whether some memories are invitations. I do not claim to know the science. I keep records and interviews, and I listen. That is my work and my obsession. When I first heard the story of the corridor, I thought it sounded familiar because so many of us live in ordinary buildings with ordinary noises. The narrator, Lena, lived alone in a low-rent building with a long, peeling hallway and a flickering exit sign that hummed like a motor. Trapped insect. One Thursday evening she came home and the air smelled of burnt rubber and lemon cleaner, a detail she said she wrote down later because it felt so wrong. The first exchange in the scene goes like this. Lena said, "I had this feeling, like a recorded scene playing in the back of my head." Her neighbor Miguel replied, "That is déjà vu, everyone gets that." But Lena answered, "Not like this. This one stayed and told me things." Miguel asked, "What do you mean, told you things?" Lena said, "It told me the steps of someone walking, and then a door would open at exactly the right second." Miguel laughed a little and said, "You are being dramatic." Lena answered, "Then a laugh came from the end of the hall, exactly like the one in my mind." The dialogue continued, each line sharpening the oddness of the night, until Miguel admitted he had heard it too, as if the hall itself were reading from a script. The description is rich in sensory detail. Lena felt the creak under her footboards, the vibration through the corridor from a passing bus, the stale perfume of someone leaving up the stairwell, the cold edge of the exit sign light on her face. She tried to test it. She timed the steps, she wrote predictions in a notebook, and every time the small sequence repeated in order the way she had written it. The pattern built until she felt a pressure behind her eyes that warned of an escalation. At the moment of greatest tension, she stood frozen 2 doors down, the smell of rubber heavier, the buzz of the sign louder, and then the exact thing she had predicted fell at the end of the hallway. She describes the sound of wood hitting linoleum and a small muffled curse. She had to call Tom, her friend, who arrived with a flashlight and a calm that did not match what she felt. They talked with Officer Ruiz, who wrote a short report, then left, the fluorescent light flickering like a metronome. The repercussions of that night were practical and personal.
Lena moved out a month later, not just because the building was old, but because she could no longer walk the hall without feeling a footstep that she had already heard. The first tension moment is here. For 3 minutes, the corridor held a silence so thick it seemed like a physical thing pressing on Lena's shoulders. She felt her throat close, the air on her tongue taste metallic, and she thought for an instant that if she moved, the pattern would break, and something worse would fill the space. She did not move, and the sound arrived exactly where it had been in her head, a certainty that left her shaking. After that night, she kept predicting small occurrences, and then watching them unfold, each correct forecast eroding the boundary between a remembered past and a possible near future. After
the first story, take a moment to share. If you have ever been stopped cold by a flash that told you what would come next, write in the comments a single word and your age then. For example, 21, cold. We will read and group replies, and your one word helps us see which sensations repeat across different lives. These kinds of experiences can be isolating, so it matters that we build a map, even a messy one. Tell us too if you kept a journal, or if you told someone who did not believe you, because patterns show up when accounts repeat. If you want your story considered for a future episode, start with the phrase "already felt" in caps so our team can find it. Now, come with me to a house in a forest where a path remembered the footsteps before the two brothers did. The second story comes from Rachel, who grew up with her brother Mark in a town ringed with old woods and a boarded house that everyone pretended not to notice. One summer evening, Mark dared her to walk the path up to that house again. The first sensory detail Rachel remembers is the smell of wet leaves, sweet and a little sour, and the steady rhythm of their boots on the trail. The dialogue unfolds like a memory revealing itself. Rachel said, "Remember the broken rail by the third step?" Mark answered, "I do, but it feels like I always knew it." Rachel said, "I knew the exact place to step so my foot would not hit the rotten plank." Mark laughed and said, "You are being careful like we practiced." Rachel replied, "We never practiced this." Mark asked, "Then why did you know?" Rachel said, "Because I pictured it, and then there it was." Their conversation extended as they reached the old house and heard a floorboard upstairs creak at the same time Rachel had pictured it, and then a window shade that behaved exactly as she had seen in her mind. Rachel described the light in the attic like old tea, thin and warm, the sound of a moth trapped in a lamp, the texture of wallpaper like dried leaves. As they sniffed the air and called out, "Hello," a woman answered, but not with words at first, with a silhouette at the window that matched the one Rachel had sketched the night before. Her brother reached for her sleeve and whispered, "We should leave now." But Rachel found herself moving toward the open door because she had already watched herself do that. In the exchange that follows, there are 6 to 8 short lines of dialogue that heighten the dread. A neighbor, Sarah, later told police that when she arrived, the two siblings were pale and out of breath and said they saw her standing there like a statue. Sarah asked, "Who did you see?" Rachel said, "Someone in the window." Sarah said, "Did she speak?" Mark answered, "Not at first." The brothers ran back down the path with leaves snapping under their feet, their breathing loud in their ears like drums. The second tension moment develops as they reach the car. The brothers fumble their keys, the engine refuses to catch, and the world compresses into the quickness of a heart. Rachel is certain they were seconds from being seen by something that might follow them, and the smell of old smoke and cold metal lodged in her clothes for days. That night, the sketch Rachel had made of the woman was later recognized by an old historian as matching a photograph from a lost census, a small coincidence that made the memory feel heavier. The third story is about a road and a choice that averted disaster. Miguel told this one while we sat in his kitchen, coffee cooling and sun cutting a bright line across the table. He drives for work, long distances that make repetitive patterns common, and it was on one routine run that déjà vu intervened. The sensory start is the way the steering wheel felt that morning, slightly tacky from the heat, the taste of cold coffee, the hiss of tires on a patchy shoulder.
Miguel describes a dream he had 3 nights in a row where a blue sedan ran a light at the intersection by the old mill and a delivery truck braked too late. The dream provided a line-by-line sequence. He woke and told his friend Nick that he did not want to take that road, and Nick said, "You were being paranoid." Miguel answered, "I have been seeing it in a dream." Nick said, "Dreams do not do that." Miguel said, "This one did." They argued in the car, voices low, each exchange pushing the choice. Miguel finally took a different route and called his boss to say he would be late. 30 minutes later, the radio reported that a blue sedan had collided at the very intersection he had avoided. Miguel heard the description and the reporter saying the truck driver was injured. The dialogue that night with the dispatcher and Dr. Patel at the emergency room is recorded in a short note Miguel lent me. The dispatcher asked, "Did you see anything?" Miguel said, "No, I called in because I avoided it." Dr. Patel later told Miguel that the man in the blue sedan had not survived. The third tension moment is long enough to linger. Miguel remembers the moment his phone buzzed while he waited at a light, the sound identical to the buzz in his dream, and his hands went cold. Time felt elastic, stretched thin by an almost prophetic echo. He thought, if I had driven that route, I would have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. The feeling pressed like a palm on his chest and left him with a guilt that tasted like iron. He still refuses to drive near that intersection when he can avoid it. The fourth and final story is set in a care facility where a resident kept saying the same sentence every night, and where staff began to catalog the repetitions like entries in a ledger. The resident was Mrs. Adelaide, a small woman with white hair and eyes that shone like wet stone. Emily, a night nurse, heard the same phrase 3 nights in a row and wrote it down. The phrase was, "I am leaving at dawn," which at first sounded like confusion, then like a premonition. The first scene inside the ward is quiet and smells faintly of antiseptic and boiled tea. Emily described the carpet as a muffling ocean, the fluorescent light soft as a cloud, the metallic taste of late coffee. The dialogue between Emily and Rachel, the charge nurse, is long and full of small tensions. Emily said, "She keeps saying the same sentence." Rachel asked, "Do you think she means it?" Emily answered, "She is coherent during the day." Rachel replied, "Maybe it is a memory." Emily said, "It feels like a warning." Rachel asked, "Have you checked her records?" Emily answered, "I did, and nothing obvious came up." The staff decided to increase observations, but each night at 3:30, Mrs. Adelaide would sit up and say the same thing with a precision that made the hair on the back of Emily's neck stand up. The team included Dr. Patel, who suggested writing down the times, and Officer Ruiz, who visited once to reassure them. Documents appeared in a small binder, notes from overnight shifts, and a grainy video of Mrs. Adelaide turning in her bed at exactly the minute Emily had written. This sequence escalated into the third official tension moment. The third moment of tension is not a single sudden action, but a slow compression of repeated nights where the staff expected a threshold to be crossed. Each night, the phrase grew more insistent, the eyes more focused, and Emily's notes thickened. They called in a neurologist and were told that some memory circuits can loop, but a loop that repeats future tense, like a plan, suggested something else. One dawn, Mrs. Adelaide left her bed and walked to the window and said, "I will be long gone by dawn before the sun lifts," and she closed her eyes. That day, a fire alarm sparked in the building next door, and the staff had to coordinate evacuations. Mrs. Adelaide was safe, but when Emily reread her notes, she found the phrase had been exact, and the timing was off by only minutes. The encounter left everyone unsettled and made the staff more willing to record the small repeated things people say. When I step back from these 4 accounts, I keep returning to the same uneasy question. Are these episodes proof of hidden circuits in the brain, neural hiccups that stitch a fragment of a dream onto waking life, or are they hints that our experience of time is porous? Ways that feel like memory. I am careful to present these stories as they were told, with names like Lena, Miguel, Rachel, Mark, Nick, Tom, Sarah, Officer Ruiz, Dr. Patel, Emily, and Mrs. Adelaide appearing across pages of notes and brief recorded statements. Each story contains sensory anchors and repeated phrases, and in 3 moments there is a pressure, a tension that changes choices and lives. Personally, this work made me change my habits. I started keeping a notebook, I stopped walking certain routes, I talk to people I barely know when they report strange recurrences because patterns matter. I do not pretend to have answers. I think some phenomena are neural and some are harder to name. Some of these experiences felt like warnings, some like echoes, and some like parts of a map that I had not yet learned to read. If you felt chills during any of these stories, please leave a comment with one line and the word "already felt" if you want to be considered for future episodes. If you enjoyed this collection and want more careful, documented narratives that mix testimony with interviews and notes, subscribe to the channel. We dig into records, speak to experts, and try to make sense of the oddest corners of memory. Thank you for listening and for sharing what you remember. Sometimes remembering the future is the only way to change the past you are carrying forward.